I'd like to welcome everybody out there to BlueRainGallery's virtual artist lecture series with Matthew Sievers. The title of today's lecture is Expressing Mood Through Modern Glazing, and Matthew Sievers has presented a wonderful presentation for us. Matthew is a fine painter in our stable that we've been working with now for about 5 years. Matthew's paintings can be seen right behind me here on this wall. There's quite a variety in terms of what we have hanging at the moment. We have kind of a blustery winter barn scene, more of a sunset barn scene over to the right, some really beautiful tree paintings. He's very well known for his depictions of nature, landscapes, rural farm scenes, lone trees in a field. These are some of the things that Matthew paints often in his work. Matthew is, in my opinion, one of the best mark makers that I know. His paintings are full of really beautiful, very expressive and deliberate marks that really sort of enhance the painting and invite you to sort of explore the layers of paint and what it is he's trying to express through moving that paint. Matthew also plays a lot with light in his work. As you can see behind me, this is evident in many of these paintings. So we're very pleased to have Matthew here with us today. I'm looking forward to introducing you all to him. Matthew, can you say hello to everyone, please?
Hello. In case you have a multi-box, I'm not sure where we're at, but I loved the introduction. Thanks, Denise. I'm excited to be here. BlueRainGallery has been phenomenal. I'm thrilled to be part of the family and the success and all the hard work that they put in. And I'm excited to get to show off my studio today. This is my favorite place in the world. I love coming out here to create. I've been able to make it my own little sanctuary and place of inspiration, as well as somewhere to spend time with my beautiful wife and kids here in Rigby, which is where I grew up. So I'm going to give you a quick tour of what my space is and then move forward into the series. This space is a storage room. Pretty basic. A spot where I can sculpt. These are a few sculptures I've had cast in marble and an armature I have ready for another piece I'm starting. Also a good space to do pinewood derby cars. This wall is kind of an inspiration wall. This is a study that I did of, my mind has just blanked. Yeah, Nikolai Fechin. This is a Todorovich piece that I had purchased. 2 of the paintings my father did, this piece and the trees here. And of course, every studio needs a lot of storage space, which I'm very stingy with. No Christmas trees get stored out here. So we'll make our way down real quick. And this is my main studio space. It's 50 feet long, 26 feet wide, and it was a beast to make. I actually had all the plans, the layout, the timber, everything arrive the end of October, and my contractor was MIA. I was messaging and emailing, trying to get him to start on the job, and he had clearly dropped all contact. So watching a lot of YouTube videos and trial and error, my uncles, my brother-in-laws, my family dove in and helped me get this built from November 1st, basically in a matter of weeks, and the roof on, and it enclosed before it started to snow. It was such a crazy project. And because of that, this building means so much to me, the stress and the hours and the time. And then to get to make it a spot where I hang artwork that's inspirational to me, and I create and I use my walls really as a space to hang a piece that is being built through the process. Like there's several layers, so different stages, and sometimes you get to a stage that you didn't really think was where it was headed, but that build, there's an emotional mark or scrape or drip that you're enjoying, and sometimes it has to be covered up and you might bring it back, but letting them hang and breathe and have their own space goes so far in the creative process. So growing up in this area of Idaho, I had a father who was a professional artist, Gregory Sievers, phenomenal and a great teacher. My first plein air painting, I was probably in 7th grade, and we had just hiked up to Table Rock, which is in the Grand Teton area, in the summer. And we had seen this beautiful waterfall and several aspen groves that were changing. And we thought, oh, let's go up there and paint these on location. Of course, Dad was all the energy. I'm the kind of dragging my feet 7th grader, but he got paints together and kits so we could go paint plein air on location. And he set up on this really cool waterfall, which was pretty technical, and I was a tree guy. So I started painting these yellow aspen trees, and it was amazing. I still remember the temperature and the day. The air was chilly. In fact, it was a no burn time of year, so we had set cup of noodles in the sun because we couldn't make a fire, and we let the noodles just get soggy rather than boiled. It was a horrible lunch, but the day was amazing. And as I was standing there painting these aspen trees, this gust of wind came through and it just rained yellow leaves, and they were sticking on my painting and in my palette, but they all came down at once. It was just like a spiritual experience. And I've kind of been in love with painting trees ever since. The earliest parts of my career until now, trees have definitely been a main subject matter and a staple for my work. And I was going to show my plein air kit now. I just got a battery low warning on my earpiece, so I might have to change that in a sec. So this is ready to go out the door. I just take it and go. But this is my tripod, which I really love. With one turn, you can have it all set up very quickly, take it down real easy. And then you hang your paint bag from this hook. You can put a rock in your bag and weigh it down. My brushes, my towels, all my paints are enclosed in this plastic kit, and a Strata easel. These are made by Brian Mark Taylor. Not the lightest, but built for durability. This thing will last forever, and they come in a lot of different sizes. So back to the tree paintings. I want to talk briefly about where my style has evolved and what inspires me with my current series of the tree. So this piece, I'd say, is really strongly based on an old black and white tree that was a poster that was in my grandma's house that had all these horizontal lines, and you can see all the horizontal shapes in the mark making, even hidden inside the thick colors. And hers, those lines were designed to be filled in with names, and it was like a genealogy tree. And full bubbly handwriting just made it full of leaves, and I loved how that looked. So I use a lot of those shapes when I'm building my tree, and the connective nature it has that we're all there together. But the lighting on it, where it's backlit, like the tree is on this stage and the sun is creating this ray of light. I love that scene in like a movie where the actress is walking out on the stage and the camera follows her towards the audience, and she's backlit and you're part of that experience, and she's out there on her own, just not conforming. You know, this tree isn't pruned back. It's like, this is me, take it or leave it. Being yourself, being true. And I love that mood in lighting. I use it a lot in my work when it's a lone object. So the application to get these layers, I'm using a lot of different tools, and I can show you here on this sunset piece. This was initially painted in a really intense green, like these corners, actually the whole sky. And as I scraped a violet thinly over this green, you get this great transparent depth into these clouds. Even the greens coming through the blues and the teals here, so much depth. And that's what really speaks to me, where your eye travels through several veils of color into a painting. And yet the mark making is very emotional. You get a sense of, ooh, this light source is put on boldly and confidently, and then I can come back with brushwork. Some of the tools I might use that are a little bit not traditional. This is actually a door sweep that you'd put on the bottom of a door. And as I glaze in paint, I can use this to scrape that across several times with different mediums to get that kind of transparency in a wide, flat area, or even a roller to keep it thick in areas and choppy, get a repeated pattern. This is a tool used for pottery. When they throw pots on a potter's wheel, you can carve the clay. I love using something that's rubber to get an interesting mark before the brushwork comes in and gives you this, beautiful calligraphy, sweeping or detail. And all that variety, it's like an orchestra of instruments and all the diverse sounds and different elements so that your eye doesn't get bored. It's not all the same brushwork everywhere. It's, the bass drum and the violins. I love that.
Matthew, can I
Denise
interrupt for just a second?
Absolutely.
It looks like we have a question from Ted. Ted, go ahead and unmute yourself if you haven't already.
Okay, hi, Ted Hansen. I'm in Minneapolis. I'm actually from Dillon, Montana, just north of where you're at by a little bit. So Western landscapes. Awesome. Familiar with the Western landscapes. And I do quite a bit of that. I'm curious about your studio though. I notice you don't have, it doesn't appear to have like windows or natural light. And I'm curious about why you chose to go that route, and to get technical, what lighting do you use to make it, I guess you have some windows over there for your workspace, but.
No, yeah. And I haven't shown those off, but I'm glad you asked that question. And I'm sorry, my earbud's gonna die. I'm gonna switch to kind of an echoey audio here in a minute. But so when I built this, I wanted these great big high windows so I could get a north light down to my space and a blind so I can really control the light in two ways. But I do love painting models as well. And to light a model, north light is incredibly valuable because as the sun goes across the sky behind the studio, this is the most unchanging light on your subject matter. And I can really control that here. I had them closed because we were getting a lot of glare for the camera for this meeting, but for painting, wonderful. The rest of the windows, I don't want any from on the east or west side of the building because there's so much glare that you get and heat and mostly lighting, especially as I'm looking at my canvas. Though I did have this though here just for an AC unit. The easel itself, I purchased this several years before I could use it. My old studio was in my house and our home had sat on the market for a couple of years. It had this aviary in the basement that had a view, but it had this amazing ventilation system to suck all the air out of the space. And anyone else who looked at the property wasn't sure with it, but when I saw it, it was like, oh wow, this is the perfect studio to vent all the different fumes and things that I'm getting from the oil paints. So we dumped on it, but it had a low ceiling. So this easel just sat in the garage for a couple of years and it's all counterweighted. and rolls on this track here, but obviously I need a really high ceiling to get away with actually using this Hughes easel. But it's one of my favorite things about my studio now is that the bottom third of painting gets as much attention as the top 2/3, where earlier in my career, if you couldn't get a big painting up, you ended up painting like this, and you'd actually find when you're painting low, if you're right-handed, a lot of your marks start going this direction because you're trying to get down. And now I can bring it up as high as I want and sign my name or whatever right on the bottom. But I love that question. Were there any others that came through, Denise?
No, that was the first question of the day. But please,
Awesome.
if anyone else has a question, just use the raise your hand feature that's under participants at the bottom of the screen, or send me a question through chat.
Absolutely. So the reason we're doing Zoom is because I like this interactive part of it. I really love the questions. It's how I prefer to do a lecture. And rather than doing a live recording and then going through and splicing everything so it's so seamless and pretty and whatnot, it's not really my style. I think this is awesome. So anyone who's here for the Zoom, I'm glad you're here, and I hope that you would throw anything out. In fact, I had done a lecture in January in Scottsdale, and someone had asked a question that seemed so, I guess I'd say amateur. I'm not sure exactly how I'd put it, but the question was, why would I do a horizontal composition versus vertical versus square? And it ended up being like this 10-minute conversation. And it was interesting because a few artists had different thoughts from myself, but just to get through it quickly, each piece for me is all about the feeling of the painting. A vertical piece has a completely different feeling from a horizontal. And my favorite composition is actually square, because square reads so contemporary right now. It's not something that was used that much in painting. And a lot of my artwork is based on going away from the normal idea of composition, where painting would fight against photography. For example, if there was a lens flare and light comes into the camera and creates a flare, just like it can come into our eye and we're seeing dust and things, painting would remove those elements. And I love including them in the painting because it feels like real light being emitted from the painting and entering our eye or flaring off our glasses or whatever it might be, whatever your imagination comes up with. For example, I'm going to run over to this painting here. This piece, I really love how the light hitting the roof and it kind of cascades across the snow, and I'm pushing some elements that are actually natural and bringing in a more effect of light. But this lens flare right here is one of my favorite marks. It's really transparent. It breaks across this barn and it adds a secondary focal point, what is clearly the main focal point of the piece, with contrast, vanishing point, and light source, and then boom, magenta lens flare. I love that. So if there's any more questions, definitely ask them to, but I'm gonna start showing some of the, oh, what's that? There's a question.
You talk about lens flare. So
yeah.
Question as far as, do you work then from photographs, memory, combination of both, or plein air?
So when I do plein air, it's definitely to understand the color and shadows, and photography makes all the greens much darker. It makes the light wash things out. And when I'm taking my photos, I'll often change the focal point for where light enters the aperture, so I get the darks or the lights, just like in an iPhone where you touch the screen. But this here is kind of an example of a ongoing process of a tree. This is just of a photo of one of my earlier paintings, not the photo of the tree itself. But I'm taking snippets. Say I was to photograph the top left corner of this painting and take it into Photoshop and use it as a veil to plan where I'm pushing the lens flare, the glare that I saw in the original photo, so that there's just more of an emotional mark I can make, and you get more atmosphere as if this tree was photographed a mile away, and then I've zoomed in on the photo and you're looking at a tree through atmosphere. And I'm doing that entirely to create a sense of memory. I want my paintings to be where it's not like a photo, it's more like the memory of somewhere we've been. So anyone could look at my painting and say, oh, I think I've been there, but it's actually out of focus. It's more like, this seems like a memory that I've had as well. So I'm creating those glazing layers with a lot of different mediums. Amy, can you show, well, these are some of my brushes and mediums here, but I've set up kind of a thick to thin I don't know, progression of mediums here. Of course, mineral spirits being the thinnest, where you can get an oil to look like a watercolor if you wanted. Linseed oil and walnut oil, this is probably my most common medium. This will thin the paint, but slow the drying time, where others will thin the paint and speed the drying time up to liquid. And then of course, this medium d'impactement, impasto medium, this stuff can actually make the paint have so much body, almost to the point of really warm Play-Doh. That's too thick, but very thick. And speeds the drying. So to keep it real basic, glazing, you can either speed the drying time or slow the drying time, thin the paint or thicken the paint. And I could actually make all my oils react almost exactly like acrylic. And acrylic paint, Golden has come out with mediums, you can paint with acrylic and have the effects that oils have. But with a little time invested, you can really start to get some of this, I don't know, transparency or opacity playing together. So every tube of paint has this little square here. So if it's a clear square, this is transparent. It's where if I add medium, this will work great as a glaze because the pigments in the paint are going to be small enough to make this really smooth, clear veil as you spread it out, where if it's a black square, it's very opaque. It's really hard to get it to be a good medium. It'll have chunky pigment, or you'll thin it out and you won't see through it. And then this square with a line through it is semi-transparent, where it's kind of in between the two, obviously. There's a great book. I'm not sure I could recommend buying it. So much of it goes over every single paint in glazing, but and how every paint is made, what material they're using to create each type of paint. But in the first half of the book, it's really amazing what it goes over. For example, this slow build of paint was used in the Mona Lisa. It's called sfumato. I don't know if you can see this here. This is the word, sfumato. And basically, the idea is to get a very subtle color change. So this whole sky was painted in a deep purple, kind of like the grass or mountains here. And then a veil of transparent kind of flesh tone is scraped across that. And I'm getting a slow build with blues on top of the purples, peaches on top of the purples. And I used a lot of roller in this because I want these horizontal wispy lines to create movement in this big empty space. And I like that these even show what color is underneath that veil of paint. And leaving areas really geometric, because if it's a sky, of course it's soft. But to have a geometric shape keeps you on your toes. And a lot of my work is really kind of inspired by the thought of a campfire, where if you're sitting in front of a campfire and watching the flames flicker, there's not a vanishing point, but there's warm and cold, there's high contrast, dark and bright, and movement. So often a river or a creek in a painting will have a vanishing point. It'll end here and get bigger and bigger as it comes towards the viewer. But I like to move away from that, where my vanishing point is more designed with these diagonals, the diagonal of these dots or lens flares or light breaking through clouds, this point to this point, and shapes that bring you in, and those transparent layers to bring you in. So it's very inviting, but there's a lot of movement and things happening in different marks. So it's kind of like that sense of staring into a campfire rather than light speed ahead, vanishing point given to you instantly. So some of the marks that this was created with, for example, I love this one here. If you can come in on that, Amy. So this was created with a roller where I built up the paint very heavy, picked it up with a roller, and just like when you're trying to get paint off of a roller if you were painting a wall, and you try to unload the roller in the thin part of the tray, and the paint will whip, that was created in the same kind of way here. And this texture is unique, which makes this palette knife area unique because they're so different from each other, or the roller, or this brushwork, and just a very strong variety in the marks so that you feel the emotion of that the roller was loaded and pow, I hit it. Now, I might have gone back and softened some areas, but I wanted this one to stay bold, and I want a lot of marks in the painting to have confidence, where I mixed the color, I mixed the value right, and I just knocked it in. And on top of all these veils that build up, I build up to an area where I can use brushwork to show where the color was mixed opaque and thick and laid in one confident mark. There was one more thing I wanted to touch on with that I was getting to, but it'll come to me here in a second. Are there any questions so far, Denise, on the?
Yeah, actually perfect timing.
Great.
So there's a question that just came through the chat. When layering, are you working wet on wet or waiting for it to set up? Or does it just depend?
Yeah, great question, and that's actually kind of where I was headed, so I'm glad you asked. So there are areas that I'm letting the paint underneath blend, kind of an alla prima approach, where it is wet into wet. There's scumbling, where I'm getting a mixture from one color to another and having them bleed and mix right on the surface. And then I will let that dry completely and then come back and roll or brush on top a very thin transparent layer to create atmosphere and to push things back. Like if you were to imagine looking off at a mountain in the distance, and you take that photo, and then as you blow it up and bring it forward, everything has this hazy atmosphere. You're looking through lots of particles of air, and I want that on top of everything if I'm doing a piece that is very vast and distant. So there's always a drying stage where I come back into the piece once it's completely dry. Yeah. So in this process, there's kind of an art theory of painting thin to thick, which is also dark to light. So the darkest darks will go down first, as thin as you can, and as you get to the brighter area of the painting, you use thicker and thicker paint, which in oil has a lot of oil, so they'll call it the fat. And this typically would be the thickest paint in this composition. And then also, mediums can get very brittle, as does oil, but they get brittle really quickly. Oil paint, maybe 50 years. You can see Pinots now that are, I don't know, 60, 70 years old, and they've completely cracked because they were painted on a canvas that got dusted, and when they dust, it bowed and it cracked the paint. So one thing that glazing book goes over in great detail is how canvas paintings should be glued to panel for archival purposes, or you can paint on panel directly that is prepared with gesso before you paint on the gesso. So this is on a board that's cradled with supports on the back so that it can't ever be damaged when it's cleaned or dusted or anything like that. In fact, this, I can show you these panels here real quick. This is actually a good example, though I wasn't planning on using it. Actually, this is even better. So the initial panel looks like this. I then gessoed several layers to get a very unique texture where I've sanded it down so it almost gives me a toothiness like a fairly smooth linen. And then I've used a umber to tone this, and these marks are not wood grains. This is me wiping paint to give me this warm color. And then I plotted in my sketch in darks, and then I let the darks dry completely. And now from here, I can start to really get it expressive and plot in color. This piece is gonna be where there's an intense orange sunset late in the evening, hitting most of the barn and trees. These trees will be mostly orange from the sun hitting them, where it starts to fall in shadow, bright sunlight hitting the top of a white barn, which will be mostly orange. Straw bales that'll be mostly orange. And the entire piece is gonna have a pretty monochromatic, warm yellow-orange feel with a fairly yellowish green to hit the grass in the foreground that are gonna be in shadow. But I'll definitely post that when it's done. My dad, being a professional artist, was always eager to paint with me. I was one of the only kids that was really interested in drawing and painting. My other siblings were artistic in their own ways, especially with music and their own creativity, but I really enjoyed drawing. And what happens is, just like my studio here is full of my own work, your kids will get inspired greatly with your own work. That's what they're around. But Dad actually had hung in front of my room several pieces that were nothing like his work. One was a Laurel and Hardy, like black and white, almost ink blot, and this Charlie Chaplin, that they were real drippy on the bottom, but just two-tone, almost like graffiti, which I love. And I use some of those graffiti thoughts in my process, where things will look like I've used masking tape to seclude an area, paint it, and then remove the tape. I really love those sharp edges that you get in graffiti. And then as I came around the corner from my bedroom, there was this abstract painting of Branham, a good artist friend of mine now. And I studied this piece all the time. It was at the top of the stairs. So as I went up the stairs, I'm looking at it all the way up to my bedroom. And it was a contemporary abstract of two faces facing each other. a king and a queen, or you could see a face looking directly at you. And very geometric in shape, Picasso inspired, and really textured. If you were to see it in person, the layers that are stacked, each color was masked and then thick paint applied and then the masking tape removed. And those two pieces, I saw them almost every day. And Dad was never forcing his style on me. As I've continued my education, so many artists are like, this is how you paint. I've arrived. Do it like I do it. Where he was very much like, this is how you draw. So what if you do it like this? And then as I developed those skills, these are warm and cool in color palette. And this is the tools you can use. Now, let's see where you go with it, which was really great for my career. And it's definitely kept me open to changing my style, always hoping to evolve or be inspired by something else I see, applying it, evolving, changing, and just continually growing with that process, which has been phenomenal. Even the work I've shown in BlueRainGallery over the last 4 years, has evolved from when I originally brought them. My first body of work was mostly figurative, and they had some success, but by the time I brought more work, my style had evolved and changed, and it continues to go that way, which is just fun and exciting. And I have a lot of collectors who have collected my work along the way, and it's interesting to see how much they love the changes. And even my early work, I still keep it here in my home. I love it. It's got it speaks to me still, but it's always the next painting that you're the most excited about. It's kind of like, as I'm working on this painting, there's a stage where it's the be all. And I'm thinking, oh, I really love this. I can't ever do anything better, and I'm never gonna let it go. I'm gonna keep this one. And I take it off the easel and I set it off to the side and I put the next one up, and I'm kind of drawing and I'm looking over at this painting and I'm like, you're still the best. And I work a little more, and I'm struggling, warm, cold, values drawing, and I fall in love with what I'm doing, and I'm starting to look at that piece, and it's like, you've grown up and it's time to go find a home and move out. So it's a really fun process, and it's very fulfilling. Denise, had any other questions come up?
Yes, actually, Matthew. But before I ask you the next question that came through the chat, I did just want to say that from the gallery perspective, it's been really interesting to watch your evolution just in the last 5 years. You know,
Awesome.
you were talking about how that first body of work you brought us had a lot of figurative work in it. And, you know, it's just been a real joy from the gallery perspective to see that evolution. And I personally love what you're doing these days.
Well, awesome, thank you. Well, the figures are coming back, but it's gonna have this as a main element and see where those evolve. Of course, I'll always be painting the trees as well. In fact, there was a tree I laid in. There was a tree fort kind of behind our house, and it was so shabby. I just nailed like a door on this branch, and it was this olive tree where the branch went over this, it was kind of a cattle run where we would have a few sheep or cows in, and if you laid on that door when it was breezy, it rocked, like it would raise almost a good foot or so. And it was my favorite place to draw or read comic books. And I spent so much time there, but that's another one of those things that helped me fall in love with the trees and how they're so, have their own little special spirit. And it's so fun to paint them kind of like a portrait, like they have their own character, and to play with light and see how far I can push it. Anyways, what was that question, Denise?
Sure. Well, actually, you just set it up nicely for that next question, because the trees have, you know, kind of become this bit of a series for you. And so the question that the audience has is, when doing a series, how do you choose what to vary?
Oh, interesting. So there's a program right now. It's supplied by Photoshop, and I had taken a workshop from Jeffrey Watts, awesome artist out of California, and he said a great artist will use every tool available to them to its fullest extent. And he was actually saying that because someone had brought up projectors and projecting in art, and all artists feel developing the skill to draw is so important. His point was, what if you're doing a composition that is 20 feet tall by 100 feet wide, and a projector were to make it a better painting, but you're stuck on refusing to use the tools available to you. Anyways, Photoshop has a dummied down program, and it's called Photoshop Mix. You can have it on an iPad. You don't have to pay for the whole Photoshop, but you can take images, create layered scenes through it, and then apply different effects. So if I get a new photo of a tree, but it's a tree I love, it doesn't look like the Arbor Day generic tree. It has a lot of character, like it's open here and it sweeps and it's these beautiful reds, and it's hard to get another image like it. I'll often take that into the program and I can chop it up. I can put layered images on top. I can change where the light is rather than being lit from behind, put the sunlight behind it, change the foreground, and do all sorts of things to change the character and the mood of the piece. And I really love that. A lot of my tree pieces, they're titled based on the idea of that singer walking out on the stage. I love the idea that it's this elegant gown where there is a season to the tree, that you can tell the season looking at it. I want you to be able to feel the temperature of that composition. So the, I don't know, even changing the color of the leaves slightly and having it this, you know, red formal dress. There's so many ways to play with that. And of course, all the different types of trees. But most recently I did a painting of aspens that all the light was in the front, and the back was this intense blue mountain that was snow-capped, and it was very vertical and quite narrow, and all the mountain flowers in the foreground. And what was fun was this kind of scene's been painted a lot in Colorado. You see the mountain flowers being kind of detailed and kind of each petal put onto each flower in the foreground, and it wasn't my thing. I love aspen trees, but I didn't like those kind of paintings where it almost felt like a Kincaid version of an aspen tree. And what I did was, with the flowers, I would do marks kind of, let's see, kind of like this, where I'm getting detail by scraping paint, and you're seeing blades of grass and dark into the grass and browns, like dry grass underneath the greens. And it's just bold mark making and scraping and putting oil before I scrape to leave the darks and wiping away. So you're getting little tiny details in a big expressive mark. And the foreground of that piece had all these mountain flower colors, but like if it's Indian sagebrush, it was pow, just a scrape. And that's where there was a bunch of flowers off in a corner, rather than going in with a brush and making it noodled and overly detailed and less expressive. Any other questions, Denise?
Yes, actually, we have a question from an enthusiast photographer in the audience.
Awesome.
And they photograph nature subjects, and in addition to looking at other photographs, they like to look at paintings for ideas in nature. And they especially like to look for more abstract looks in nature, and they may not be as abstract as your paintings, but they still make one think of a painter, of a painterly looking photo versus a documentary photo.
Awesome.
Something like quaking aspen leaves and slow shutter speed. And
awesome.
Their question to you after all of that is, do you have any thoughts on how to improve creative thinking that transcends the medium used based on your work process?
Ask it one more time.
Sure. Do you have any thoughts on how to improve creative thinking that transcends the medium used based on your work process?
Sure. So for photography especially, it's amazing having the iPhone now. As soon as the newest iPhone comes out, I'm like, that's a write-off, and I buy the newest camera, because they are doing such a great job at making a really great piece of equipment that can be right in your pocket and you're caught out hiking. We do a lot of camping, fishing, motorback riding, biking, and I now have something that actually does a good enough job. I don't have to pack a big Nikon with me and be ready for that perfect shot. I just came back from some hot tubs with my family up near here, and there was this amazing sunset that was hitting just the tops of trees. Like, the sunset was amazing. I turn around and the pine trees, just the tops were getting hit in orange, and the blue that was coming out of the greens in the foreground were beautiful. And all I had with me was my iPhone, but it was enough for me to capture and choose the areas where I wanted to capture the lighting. But I almost had to take a visual memory, because when I get home, those blues are not nearly as tense as what I was seeing with my eye. So that Photoshop mix, or playing with the color inside iPhoto even, I can bring it back to perhaps even make it a little bit more intense than what I was seeing, to make sure the viewer gets to experience what I was seeing, that it's very tangible and noticeable. And I would say playing with those features and different things through Photoshop and really manipulating is what is the biggest thing I've found, as far as, I don't know, overcoming barriers and getting more emotion in the piece. And I was really hesitant to do so. It's only been perhaps 6 years or so that I've been using those features. I was thinking that to be a purist, I had to envision the intensity in my mind and take paintings I had done on location and then set the paintings off to the side and have the idea and then start painting. And it kind of kept me in this style that was very Fauvist, because I loved how comic book covers were outlined and stylized, and you had this dark blue line giving everything a three-dimensional, and it would pop out. And my color intensity, where I was wanting to show a vibration through the colors, they were coming out almost psychedelic. They were intense, they were beautiful, but I was having a hard time breaking away from that. And as I started using more of these other features, I could confidently make something more monochromatic and soft and yet powerful, and push contrast and have a clearer idea of where I was going with my painting before I started even my first brush stroke, which was huge for me. Yeah. Any other questions?
Well, you actually just sort of answered the next question in a way. The next
I probably failed on answering the last one, but that's what I got.
No, it was excellent. I really liked hearing how technology, you embracing technology has improved your experience working, or at least getting the ideas out for you. It's kind of opened up new doorways. I liked hearing about that.
Absolutely.
But the next question was, how has your palette of colors changed over time? And you just sort of answered this in the last question, but you might have more to say about that.
Sure. So I've kind of been, how would I say this? I used to buy every new color. I loved when I first found Payne's Gray, and it was kind of this fun experience to see how you could introduce a new color to your palette. And it started to get kind of like a runaway train because they're all so fun. And I started going more to a Zorn mindset with encouragement from an artist friend of mine, where the idea was to minimalize your palette and mix for any painting. There's this great Zorn self-portrait where he's standing there with a palette and he's painting himself, and in the piece there's blues and reds and greens, and his skin has almost like a Rembrandt where you can see the fleshy blues coming through the overlaid skin tones. And he's standing there like a boss holding his palette like, look, I've got 6 colors on here and I painted this. And it's a really cool painting. So what I've really tried to boil it down to is to have a warm and a cool of every color that is in the primary family. And a lot of my backup colors are more designed for the opacity or the transparency. But on the palette, there's a warm red and a cold red. And of course, you know, the colder is, the bluer it is, like a permanent alizarin, and the warmer, like a cad red light or any of the cadmium reds. And continue that so that I have the reds, the yellows or ochres, browns, greens, and blues. And that's all I really put out, unless I need to do something kind of crazy that I might get with like a cobalt blue, though I don't normally put that on my palette. Yeah, that's a good question.
Thank you, Matthew.
Absolutely.
So we're approaching the hour mark, and I don't have any more questions coming through the chat at this point. Was there anything else that you wanted to talk about to the group?
No, nothing particularly. I would like to have a demo available through BlueRain for anyone who's more interested in the actual stages of a painting. And that can come through in a later video. It'll be much more technical, and I may do every stage with type of wood, gesso, texture, all the thin layers building up, thin to thick, and what my mindset is as I approach different areas of the painting. So look for that on BlueRain's website in the future. But I really just want to thank everyone for coming out, and thank BlueRain. They've been such a phenomenal gallery. Please go and see my newest work that they're showing on their website. And they also have other videos available from other artists that I hope you'll check out as well. But I'm so grateful for this opportunity. It's been really fun to show off my studio. And I just am grateful for the time and everyone who has found the video or joined us here today. Thanks.
Matthew, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. See you in the future.